This is a dedication addressed to the memories of Brushy Bill Roberts, known also as Billy the Kid, Ollie L. Roberts, and also known as the Texas Kid during the 1880s and 1890s. Today, the people of Hyco, Carlton, and Hamilton County are giving recognition to a fellow citizen who called this area home, for this was truly the only home that the man ever had. He was an orphan at age 3. He lived with his Aunt Catherine Bonnie McCarty and his grandmother from Kentucky. His mother, Mary Adeline Dunn Roberts, died a few months after Billy's father left home to join Confederate troops in the Civil War. The kid lived with relatives in Kentucky and Oklahoma, which was known as Indian Territory until Aunt Catherine moved to Wichita, Kansas. After the war, Billy's father returned to Hyco with his second wife, and when Billy was about 8 years of age, he was returned to his father and his stepmother, who at that time were living near Carlton, Texas. At the age of 14, he runs away from home after some harsh treatment from his father and stayed with relatives in Sulphur Springs, Texas. Later, the kid goes to Wichita, Kansas to stay with his Aunt Bonnie. She owned and operated the Wichita City Laundry for a short time. In early spring of 1873, Aunt Bonnie moves to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she married Mr. William Antrim. Soon they moved on to Silver City, New Mexico, which was at that time a boom town with a strike of silver and gold. Mr. Antrim worked in the mines, and Catherine, his wife, ran a room and boarding house. Brushy Bill entered public school there for the first time. He had only 8 months of education. Aunt Bonnie died with TB in September 1874. For a few months, Brushy lived with his stepfather, William Antrim, and his cousin, Joseph McCarty. He was Catherine's son by a former marriage to William McCarty, who was killed in 1862 during the Civil War in Tennessee. It was not long after the death of Aunt Catherine that Brushy Bill got into trouble with the law in Silver City for stealing clothing from a Chinese laundry. From this time on, Brushy Bill was on his own to make his own way in life. He leaves Silver City, and we find him at Fort Grant, Arizona, working for the military post, serving the cavalry unit as a caretaker of military horses and equipment. Off the military base, he got into a fight one day with a large roughneck, and the fight ends in a killing by the kid. He leaves the military post and heads back to Silver City and stays on a ranch for a few weeks before leaving for Mesilla, New Mexico, on the Rio Grande, a few miles from the present city of Las Cruces, New Mexico. In August of 1877, after failing to find a ranch job, he heads east, crossing the Rio Grande River on his way to John Chisholm's ranch on the Pecos River near the present city of Roswell. There were no jobs available at the ranch, so he was advised to go up the Hondo River, which is west of the city of Roswell, to the ranch of Frank and George Cole for employment. He found a temporary job there, but later found good job with a rancher by the name of John Henry Tunstill, an Englishman from London. Billy walked into the beginning of a Lincoln County war between two hardcore factions that started with the killing of rancher Tunstill after a few weeks of employment by the said rancher. It was a period of law west of the Pecos, where no one was safe. You had to be on one side or the other. The kid was never a hero or a bloody killer, as so written in all our history books, which has built up a false legend, pure and simple. Yes, in self-defense, Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, had to kill 4 or 5 men in order to stay alive. He was sinned upon more than he sinned. He witnessed many innocent people killed by members of the law who worked on both sides of the law. This is what we call law west of the Pecos. I have talked to grandchildren of those who knew Brushy Bill or Billy the Kid, and they were quick to say that their relatives loved the kid and depended on him for protection. You will never read or find a charge against the kid for stage robbery, bank robbery, or rape. History has failed to identify one person who was killed by Brushy as being an honest, upright, clean citizen of Lincoln or Tobacco counties. The sheriff and other deputies were members of raiding parties with many well-known cutthroat outlaws on small ranchers and farmers in that community. Yes, the kid stole horses, but the question is, who didn't in those rough and tough times? Open range meant no fences, and cattle and horses roamed over the territory as unbranded stock. Large and small ranchers stole their cattle with the help of both lawmen and outlaws, as there was very little difference between them. Cattle Baron John Chisholm rigged the sheriff's election in Roswell to elect his own man, who was Pat Garrett, who was a buffalo hunter and a bounty hunter prior to becoming a sheriff. And he got this job with only 175 votes margin, and they were from the cowboys who worked for John Chisholm, whose ranch was near the city of Roswell. There is no respect for our former Sheriff Pat Garrett in Roswell or the state of New Mexico today. He failed as owner of a gambling house and a saloon in Santa Fe. He failed and was fired as customs collector at El Paso, Texas by President Teddy Roosevelt for stealing. His home here in Roswell is never discussed at historical or news media circles. It is not listed in any tourist guide or advertisements. After the famous shootout with Sheriff Pat Garrett and deputies at Fort Sumner in July of 1881, Brushy Bill headed for Old Mexico and stayed there until late summer of 1883. At that time, he returns to the United States, crossing first at El Paso, Texas, to visit John and Martell Abel. They gave him a good horse and supplies and money to carry him back to his hometown at Hyco here and at Carlton. He crossed back over the Rio Grande River after the visit to the Mexican side of the border and followed the river downstream to Brownsville, Texas, where his cousin, John Heath, was stationed as Texas Ranger assigned to the Border Patrol Unit. After a brief visit, Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, heads for Hyco, Texas. When he arrived home, he learned that his stepmother and half-brother had gone back to Kentucky or Arkansas. His father had left the community and hired out as an Indian guard to protect the wagon train, people going west on the Oregon Trail. It was reported to Bill that he was killed, that is his father, near the trading post at Coal Creek Springs in Idaho, which is north of the present city of Boise on the Snake River, which flows through the state. At this time, I want to acknowledge the work of artist James Rice for molding the bust of Brushy Bill, also to the businessmen and women in Hyco for their efforts to bring the town alive, with Brushy Bill being the man of the year in Hyco and this community. Judge Bob Hefner and the merchants for their efforts in building the public walkway for the memory of Brushy Bill. The Hyco News Review newspaper and its staff have helped the cause with their interest and the many stories printed that I have mailed in during the past 6 years. We hope to move Brushy Bill's casket and body back to Hyco for final entombment. Since this was his home as a child and as an old retired Texas cowboy who followed the rodeo circuits for more than 40 years in Texas, in Arkansas, and Oklahoma, Wyoming, North and South Dakota. Incredible but true, he never felt safe and secure in any place except right here in the Hyco-Carlton community. Why? Because he had been convicted of murder, and therefore he was an escaped convict, and he knew that there was a price on his head if and when he was ever apprehended after that break and killing of the 2 guards at the jail at Lincoln. Now, what positive proof is now available to prove Billy the Kid, William Bonney, and Brushy Bill Roberts, alias Ollie L. Roberts, are one and the same person? Now, to me, this is the most important thought or question that most people have in their mind when they read about the coming of a man who claims to be the real Billy the Kid. And I summed up this 6 years of work, and to me this is the most important question that you, the people of this community, the people of the state of Texas, and the people of the United States. Now, the following statements that I will make are conclusions drawn from the evidence as found in the data taken from an in-depth research done to identify 2 life patterns, to be that of one living person after the alleged death had been accepted as the first, as stated by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Now, it was true that Pat Garrett did kill a man on the night of July the 14th, 1881, but it was not Billy the Kid, William Bonney, and for that reason, the mystery immediately after the killing. As a matter of fact, his deputy told him at that night, he said, "Sheriff, you killed the wrong man," because Pat Garrett shot in the dark. He did not have any light. All he heard was a voice in a bedroom of Pete Maxwell's home there in Fort Sumner. Now, here are the points that are summary to prove that, in my judgment, that Brushy Bill Roberts was the true Billy the Kid. Brushy Bill tells his story to William Morrison, who is his attorney, at his home in Hamilton, Texas. Now, let me explain. Brushy Bill did not seek notoriety. Brushy Bill did not seek publicity. He was living a quiet and a peaceful life. He was a man then about 89 or 90 years of age. And Mr. Morrison heard from a client that he had. He represented a man who had inherited his brother's property in South Dakota. And the name of this man had been changed. It was one of Billy's cohorts up here during the Lincoln County War. He took the name of Joe Hines. And he came to Mr. Morrison and said, I need your assistance. I've been notified by relatives that my brother has died, and in his will, I have received a good share of his land in South Dakota. But I cannot do a thing until I can prove that I am not Joe Hines, but my real name. I do not have that real name. I am still trying to figure out from the court records in that state. But do know this much. After the trial was over, the probate judge said that you have satisfied the court that you are the true brother of this deceased person. Therefore, I am signing over the property that justly belongs to you. Well, on the way back from South Dakota, he lived at that time in Florida. He tells Mr. Morrison about all the escapades that he and Billy went through up here in Lincoln County in 1878 to 81. And he said, did you know, Mr. Morrison, Billy the Kid is still alive? He said, now come on, he's been dead. Pat Garrett killed him about 100 years ago. He said, oh no. He said, I get a letter from him every year, sometimes two, and I write him and he write others. So their conversation went on, and Mr. Morrison became very interested. And so after he returned back to his office in Florida, he immediately made plans to go to Hyco. So he goes to Hyco and he knocks on the door and meets Billy. And right there is the first time that Billy had any knowledge whatsoever that anyone living knew who he really was. His wife, the present wife at that time, he had never told her who he was. So Mr. Morrison said, you're Brushy Bill. He said, that's me. He said, I understand your name is Billy the Kid. And he became shocked, and he said, no. He said, that's my half-brother. And so he said, come on into the living room and let's talk. So it was at that time that Billy told his attorney here, Mr. Morrison, that he was really the Billy the Kid. So that's the first point. The second, Brushy at first, as I said, he refused to be identified as William Bonney or Billy the Kid because his wife was right there in the room, and this was his third or fourth wife, and he had never told her. And therefore he was completely shocked because he did not want her to know his past record. So the next item, Brushy Bill never used his full legal name, and that is strange because most everyone has used their legal name most of their life, but here was a man that he had so much fear and of being caught again and put to death that he did not use his name. But he was always alert and aware to the fact that he was already convicted for murder of Sheriff William Brady up here at Lincoln town back in 1877. Now the next point of conclusion that supports my contention that Billy, or Brushy Bill, was the true Billy the Kid that's so well known in history. Attorney Morrison was determined to prove to himself that Ollie, or Brushy Bill Roberts, was telling the truth by taking him over the trails and towns in New Mexico where he was active in outlawry in Lincoln and Tobacco counties. Next, the ability of Billy to recall and discuss places 20 to 30 minutes before they arrived in the car. He would discuss in detail And it shocked Mr. Morrison to think that it had been 70 years since Billy had traveled over these trails, these towns, and where he roamed from week to week. Now, another vital point here, Billy was illiterate in both reading and writing. It could have been impossible for Brushy Bill to know all the places with close details for that period of time. In other words, if he could neither read nor write well, some people have said, oh, well, he had read a lot of these magazines and stories, and he well versed on it, and therefore that's the way he was able to go back and point these places out. Not so, because I think any logical person would immediately say, well, if he couldn't read or write, the only way he could have known that was the fact that he actually went there himself. So that's another proof. Number 6. Now, next proof, legal affidavits to Brushy Bill's identity by credible people who knew him well for 60 to 70 years. Now, these people, I'm going to read their names here, they're not just somebody that Mr. Morrison picked up on the street and said, could you identify this person? These people knew him from day to day. And they are, number 1, Sir Volvo Galvo, who was a citizen, well liked, in Lincoln Town, New Mexico. John and Martell Abel, who lived in El Paso, Texas. Joseph B. Montoya, he lived at Ruidoso, New Mexico. DeWitt Travis, a well-known, wealthy oil man of Longview, Texas. Robert E. Lee, another businessman in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So here we have sworn to affidavits recorded by Mr. Morrison, his attorney, to prove that they knew the man to be none other than Billy the Kid. Another item of consideration, copies of letters and documents of relatives now living in Tyler, Jacksonville, and Houston, Texas. I am the only historian that has been able to dig out the complete chain of relatives, this life, and I have the letters and the documents from these people who have shown beyond a question of doubt to me, and they were astonished at first because they knew he had run away from home. Now, these are the third cousins of Billy the Kid, or Brushy Bill, but they have complete records of their family going back for over 100 years. And I have talked to each and one of these people that I'm speaking of here, in Tyler and Jacksonville and Houston, Texas. Now, another item for consideration is a sworn confession. Brushy Bill demanded a full pardon for his acts of outlawry before Governor Thomas Mabry at Santa Fe, New Mexico, as late as in November of 1950. Now keep in mind, it was in the spring of this year, 1950, that Mr. Morrison makes his first approach to Billy on the subject that you are the real kid. All right, so Billy says, I want to get a pardon. He said, I'll confess to the governor, and that's the only thing I'm interested in. I want to confess, and I want the governor of New Mexico to give me a clean bill of health for the confession. Now, the next proof, written statements made by J. Frank Dalton, who was a lifetime friend of Brushy Bill and his father, with whom he fought together in Civil War. Now get that. Billy, or Brushy Bill's daddy, and J. Frank Dalton were buddies in the war between the states. And Jesse, that's his real name. A lot of people don't believe it. But J. Frank Dalton, we later were working on that too, but he was the real Jesse James. He died in 1951. Now, we have also letters and photographs of Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, and the famous gunslinger by the name of Ozark Jack Berlin of Petersburg, Indiana. I wish I could read those letters that I have. Most convincing, absolutely no doubt about. They discuss many things that only friends and having close relations back there during the 80s and 90s. And then we also have letters and documents from Mrs. Lizzie Roberts. Now that was the last wife of Brushy Bill. And by the way, her name was Melinda Allison. She lived, born, I understand, and raised right out here at Carlton. And she too wrote letters to J. Frank Dalton telling about Billy, especially after Billy died. Another item, letters written by Lizzie Roberts to the cousin of Jesse James, who is still living, third cousin, as late as 1948 to 1950. And then the letters written by Mrs. Lizzie Roberts to Attorney Morrison and Mrs. Everhart, who is the third cousin of Jesse James. Now, the proof of Brushy Bill's illiteracy to write was demonstrated by his wives writing all his personal letters during their marriage. I had professional handwriting experts to take every letter that Billy had written up here in New Mexico. He had written a number of letters to the governor at that time, who was Governor Lew Wallace. And we have also the letters that Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, wrote to Ozark Jack Berlin, I mentioned a while ago. And the handwriting experts proved to me that Mrs. Roberts was her handwriting. She wrote every letter. Now, some of the things in those letters were very personal, and no one would have turned that writing over to someone if he could have written the letter himself. Now, the letters written to the governor, I mentioned a while ago that Billy, while he was in jail at Santa Fe the first time, while he was in jail at Lincoln, and while he was in jail waiting trial, and during his trial at Mesilla, which is just a few miles from Las Cruces today, Billy had 5 or 6 letters of which we have copies. Those letters, the originals, are now in the Lew Wallace Museum in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I had opportunity to get Xerox copies of those letters. The letters written to Governor Lew Wallace, being 5 in number, by Billy the Kid, or Brushy Bill, in 1877 to 1881, were written by different people, but they were signed with the signature William Bonney. Those too have been checked by experts, both here in New Mexico and also in Texas. I had the very best handwriting experts who were recognized by both the district and federal courts of this state to examine them. And their verdict was, as I have said, that Brushy Bill did not write a single one of them. And now another important thing, prior to Brushy Bill's car trip that he took with Morrison, he destroyed all of his personal records. That's very strange. The only thing we can think of was the fact that he did not want his present wife, which was wife number 4. He'd only been married to her about a year. And he was very apprehensive. He did not want her to know too much about his past life. And in one occasion, I recall, he said, I had fear that she would walk off and leave me. And he said, I could not stand that. So prior to Brushy Bill's car trip with Attorney Morrison, he destroyed all of his personal records and files for fear if the governor, now get this, if the governor that he had proposed this conference, if he refused to issue the full pardon but accepted his confession, he could have been promptly executed because he had already been convicted and was waiting.